Hi, parents. How are you? It's Coach Hanson here. And tonight I've got a special guest all the way from the other side of the world to come in and talk to us about empowering children. And it's coming from the Pathways to Empower. So Pathways to Empower, the question that is posed is, are you and your family thriving? And my guest, she makes the brain science of resilience and mental health easy to understand. And her resilient mindset model, which draws on the latest research in neuroscience, psychology, and education, has been applied to areas of leadership from parenting to corporate management. Parents, I'm thrilled to welcome Donna Volpitta as our very special guest on Parenting Matters today. Donna draws on her experiences as a seasoned educator and a mother of 4 adolescents, bringing humor and practical advice to her audience. Let's discover how Donna combines inspiration with education and provide a strategy that we can work with today to empower our kids. Without further ado, let's bring on Donna. Hi, Donna. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. We've been chatting a little bit before we go live here. So parents, I'm really, really excited about today because, as you know, our slogan is to empower parents and children for better focus, motivation, and grit. And if there's nobody better that I can find on the internet in this world who knows about this from a proven neuroscience and academic background, it is Donna. So Donna, welcome on board.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here, and so cool that we're, across the world and still can have this chat going. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
And I think it's your morning. It's my night, right?
Yeah. We're just after. Well, I'm actually in New Zealand, but most of our clients and our students are in Singapore. So yeah, we're around the world, right?
Yes, it's awesome.
Cool. So thanks for coming on, and I really wanted to talk about these pathways to empower. And I watched some of the earlier videos of yours, Donna, from 2013. You've been in this industry for such a long time, and obviously over these years, this is not your first rodeo. It's very seasoned. So I would not like to waste any of your time, and I really appreciate it. Opening up and tell us about the pathways to empower.
Thank you so much. Pathways to Empower actually comes from the idea of creating brain pathways to empower our kids. So everything that we do is focused on the brain science. And you're right, I've been doing this a long time. I actually created the resilient mindset model years ago. I'm an educator by trade. I was a teacher for many years. And then I went back and got my doctoral degree in learning disabilities. So I was a teacher, mostly special ed. And then when I graduated, I had 4 kids who are now all teenagers. And when I graduated, they were very young, and I wanted to understand. I actually started with the idea of, how do we build social language? How can we proactively build social language? That actually led to the idea of resilience, that the idea of how can we help our kids to handle challenges, and how can we support them and give them the tools that they need to be able to handle those challenges. I wrote a parenting book that was called The Resilience Formula, A Guide to Proactive, Not Reactive Parenting. And then that led me to the brain science. And I never went back. I love understanding the brain. And so often we think that the brain is this thing that we can't understand. So I really set out to translate it, to take the neuroscience and make it really, really easy. At the time that I was developing the model, my youngest was 6 years old. So my goal was to create a model that was easy enough for a 6-year-old to understand, but could be applied to any challenge from the playground to the boardroom. So I created the model, have been teaching it for years, and I always said that if I could find a great business partner, I could make a great business, and I found that last year. So we actually, I met my partner, Jason Schofield, and he's really great at taking the information and creating it into courses and products, and we have all sorts of materials and tools and resources for parents, teachers, for really anybody. And so we launched in January. Quite
Wow.
time to launch.
Yes. Well, the timing couldn't be better, actually, because we've needed it so much more this year. So, as fate does have it, it's amazing how, our world connects and we get the things that we need. If we are manifesting and if we're open enough to it and we're working to find, the things that we need in our life to help us along, and magically they just come, they align. So I'm looking at the website, and I can see the presentation of the material is incredible, and I'll give the parents the links to that. I actually bought a course, one of yours, and I really love the model and how you've made it. Like you said, you've made it so simple that even your 6-year-old at that time could understand it, and that's what intrigued me. I'm a very visual person. It got me, and I'm like, yes, this is something that I can share with my parents.
Yeah, it's interesting because everybody relates to the model. Everybody relates to the characters because they're really cute. And people at first look at it and they say, oh, this is for young kids. And it is. But it's also for old kids. It's also for adolescents. It's also for adults. I've done workshops at corporations and done corporate leadership workshops, and it's amazing. Everybody relates to the characters, even though they look and say, oh, maybe this is for young kids. Everyone loves cartoons.
And it's kind of, it's kind of like us, when we say to parents, come and play with your kids or whatever, it's kind of like, oh, we used to play, we don't play anymore. These things are so valuable as parents. You need to play with them. And we were talking before we came on with, devices. We need to get engaged and understand what they're actually doing. So I don't want to hold back anymore. I really, really would like you to unpack this for us. It says here, the resilience mindset model: to build resilience and foster mental health, we must understand the brain. So if I can shrink us down, do you mind taking us through the model?
Not at all.
Cool.
I love
taking
the model. So the model was to help people understand how to use challenges as opportunities to build resilience. So kind of understanding that whole idea of we all face challenges. What do we do with them? So there are 3 parts to the model, and I'm going to ask you, are you able to blow them up at all? Are you able to zoom in on any parts?
Oh, I can't with this little tab. I'm sorry.
No problem. I'll go through each of the different parts of the model. The first one is up at the top, you see the dragonfly. And on her wings, there are 4 words. We call those the 4 S's of resilience. And we say that our response to any challenge is our resilience. So that challenge could be good, bad, big, or small. It doesn't matter. But our response is guided by the brain pathways that we have around those 4 S's. So the first is self. All the things I think about who I am and what I stand for, my strengths, weaknesses, all of that stuff. The second is situation. So how can I put that challenge into perspective and break it down into its doable parts? The third is supports. Who and what do I go to ask for help if I'm having trouble? And the last one is strategies. So what are the things that I actually do in order to handle that challenge? So the interesting part is that the reality of those 4 S's is completely irrelevant. It's based on the brain pathways that we've created about them. So I could have 10 supports that I could go to, but if I don't think I have those supports, I won't go to them. So it's important that we think about it as the brain pathways that we've created. So we can use those 4 S's to prepare for, handle, and reflect on any challenge. So questioning our kids and saying, hey, is your strategy working? Do you have another one? Hey, maybe you could go for a support. Is there somebody that you can go to ask for help? Let's break this down. We can talk them through with those questions. And when we use those 4 S's, we're actually proactively building more resilient brain pathways. So that's the first part.
Really good diagrams, and it's lovely to use these diagrams for children and parents to relate, right? So they can discuss this like reading a book together, a bedtime book together.
We actually, interesting that you say that, we're actually releasing a 5-part children's book series explaining all of the different parts and explaining the brain science and everything that we teach. We're doing in a children's book series. 2 of them are out already, and we have them on our YouTube channel. We have a free read aloud of the books. So
well done.
Really easy to look at those. So that's on our YouTube channel.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. So that's the first part, right?
First part. The second part is the 4 characters. And the 4 characters actually explain our brain's natural response to challenge. So we think about decisions that we make as good versus bad, but our brains actually don't think that way. Our brains don't think in good and bad, they think in long-term versus short-term. So there's part of our brain in charge of our long-term decisions, and that's represented by the ant. That's the cortex. Okay. And if you go up a little bit, we can see the ant when he's healthy.
Right.
The ant when he's healthy, he's in charge of making decisions for our long-term, things we don't really feel like doing right now, but we know that they'll benefit us in the long term. So putting money in the bank, eating healthy, going to the doctor, all of those things, studying for our tests, doing our homework. We may not feel like doing it, but it's going to be good for us.
Right.
The ant holds tools of a healthy brain. So when we have those in place, we're better able to make those long-term decisions, and our brains are healthier.
Right.
So the second character is the grasshopper, and the grasshopper represents the limbic system of our brain, and he's in charge of the here and now. He doesn't really care if you finish your homework. He kind of wants to watch Netflix or YouTube and eat pizza. So he's the green character over there. He just wants to have fun. Okay. But he's also in charge of a couple of other things. One thing that he's in charge of is when we have little, part of brain development is getting neurochemicals. And the way I like to explain neurochemicals is they're like little text messages to tell the brain what to do. And when we work really hard towards a goal, there are some neurochemicals that are really important for the brain. So if you picture a child working really, really hard towards a goal and struggling and failing and giving up and then starting over again and finally succeeding, he kind of looks like that grasshopper with his arms up in the air. He's got that yes feeling.
Yep.
And that is actually a neurochemical response. So I like to say that self-esteem isn't a gift we can give kids. It's a neurochemical response we rob them of when we don't let them struggle. And the grasshopper.
Oh, could you say that again, please, Donna? That is key.
That self-esteem isn't a gift that we can give someone. It's a neurochemical response we rob them of when we don't let them struggle.
Wow, parents, underline that. Take note of that. Wow.
I think that's everybody's favorite line.
We're onto it.
Well, because it's shocking when you realize that, we feel like we're doing our kids a favor by not letting them struggle. Right. And the truth is that if we don't let them do that struggle, they'll never get that big burst of dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and the things that are so important for a healthy brain.
Right.
And the third version here of the grasshopper is he's the one that saves us when we're in trouble. So the main job of the brain is survival. So if we have a car coming at us and we're in ant mode, if we're using our cortex there, and we didn't switch over to the grasshopper for fight, flight, or freeze, we'd never get out of the way of the oncoming car because the ant is slow. He would never get us out of the way. So the grasshopper is there for survival. He's there for the here and now. He's there to jump out of the way of the oncoming car. The glowworm is in the red part of the brain, that little red dot, which is part of the limbic system, and that's the amygdala. And the job of the amygdala is to look out for threats. So he's the one that sees the car coming at us, and it's her job to switch control of the brain from the ant to the grasshopper. So she goes red alert, and that little version of her in red alert where she looks like she's about to get, she's got her arms up in the air and she's
Yep. Yep.
all of my kids loved that. They always said that they felt
Wow.
they were always like that in middle school.
Like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were. So that's the amygdala.
Yeah.
But the third part of the model at the very bottom, it should be at the very bottom. There it goes. That at the very bottom, what a lot of people don't realize is that our brain responds the same way to social threats as it does to physical threats. So the social threats and rewards to the brain are respect, equity, alliances, control, territory, and similarity. And REACTS is the third part of the model. It's an acronym for those social threats and rewards. When any of those are threatened, our glowworm also goes red alert and switches control of the brain from the ant to the grasshopper. And sometimes we say and do things that we don't mean. So
Right.
often we might be finding ourselves getting angry at someone, and often it's because it's one of those social threats.
All right. So somebody's disrespected us, or they're trying to be controlling, and so we move into that state of mind.
Right.
The amygdala alerts, and then it's what we do after that, right?
Right. We get into that grasshopper mode of fight,
Yeah.
flight, or freeze, and sometimes we say and do things that we don't mean. So the last character is the dragonfly. So we're going all the way back up to the top. This is kind of full circle here.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the dragonfly's job is to know when to override, to be able to override that glowworm and say, we don't need to go fight, flight, or freeze because we've got this. We've got the 4 S's in place. I have a strategy. And my favorite story of the dragonfly was one day when my son was 6 years old. I was mad at him and he was mad at me. We were both in grasshopper mode. But I went to talk to him and he said, Mom, I can't talk to you right now. I'm in grasshopper mode.
Love it.
And so having that language, being able to talk about it and being able to say that. Now that's not that we are able to say that all the time. We definitely have times when we get into grasshopper mode, but having the language really does help.
Right. And that's what I picked up in one of your videos as well, is just working on the language. And it's easy to watch Jim Quick or these specialists on exercising our brain and learning new things, right? But the problem is a lot of it goes in one ear and out the other. We think it's a great idea at the time. We know it's very valuable in our life, but we don't put it into play. And this is the problem. I mean, there's just so much information out there. And so these things, parents, when we're struggling with our kids, we can either go by default, which is our preconditioned behaviors from when we were kids, and we're using that on our kids. As we all know, a slap here and a yell here, there. And, this is all just part of different age of growing up, right? So it's a new paradigm where we'll be more conscious and we're thinking about these things, but we've got to gravitate, and these messages, we've actually got to use them. So how then, like in the context of your model, how can a parent take this and say, first of all, realize, oh, this is valuable to me. I need to change my language. Because those words that we say, this is what I was referring to one of your earlier presentations. I think it was 2013, where you were addressing a group of ladies and you were talking to them about a story where one of your children was angry with you, like the example you just gave, and they just said, I'm not in the position to talk to you right now, but we will come back to that. And even if they came to you and said, Mum, I want to talk to you now because I am in dragonfly mode, or I've moved, right? You said, sometimes I am not there yet. I am still in what mode?
Grasshopper.
I am still feeling like a grasshopper. I'll come back to you. And so just that language that the family can relate on, it's fun, but it's highly technical in the sense that it works, and just to practice it. So what can we do? I mean, you're the professional. Please tell us.
Well, I mean, I do think having the language is helpful. I think using, and it's funny because at this point, I think that my kids are done with hearing about the grasshopper. So
Right.
it's interesting as, and in particular, that's because they're teenagers and it's mine. Like it's something that I created so
Yeah.
that I want to hear it. But
Yeah.
I do think that a lot of people can begin to use that, and somehow having that language, it's
Mm.
not like it's me, it's the grasshopper that's doing it. So it's
Right.
easier to talk about. We
Yes.
get less defensive about the grasshopper because we know it's natural. We know that this is what's happening.
Love it.
And to be able to talk about that my aunt is really tired right now. So I need to rest. I need to, like, I'm not going to be able to be in aunt mode right now because it needs a break. And I actually worked with a kindergarten class that they had the kids create ant tools and had them on
Oh, okay.
the desk so that they had a little toolbox with all the ant tools. And
Love
they
it.
would say, my aunt needs a break right now. Can I get up and go, walk around? Or my aunt needs something to eat right now. So um, beginning to understand our brains. And
Mm.
we've talked a lot about resilience, but it's also about mental health. And one of the things that we're seeing right now is such an increase in mental health issues among children and teens and young
Mm.
adults. And we're all experiencing it. And we're not, but to begin to understand what's happening and begin to understand brain health and understand when there's a problem and being able to talk about it, it
Mm.
doesn't mean that we won't experience problems. We will.
Right.
But having the ability to address it and talk about it and have those conversations is
Mm.
really, really helpful. And I think that one of the other pieces that I think resonate with people is that we're seeing a lot of anxiety and depression. We're seeing in youth and adults. But
Mm.
one of the things that I like to say is that violence, anxiety, and depression roughly translate to fight, flight, and freeze. So if we think about that grasshopper mode,
Yeah.
fight is when we're trying to fight somebody. Anxiety and depression are more the freezing or flight, like just
Yeah.
avoiding. Okay. So when we think about the opposite of anxiety and depression, people often think the opposite is happiness, but that's not the case. The opposite of anxiety and depression is action, is having those 4 S's in place and being able to respond to the challenge. So having resilience. So the idea is when we have a challenge, we can respond in fight, flight, or freeze. We can get anxious, we can get depressed, and we're going to go away from it. Or we can
Mm.
say, no, I got this. I can handle this. And right now, we're all experiencing so many challenges
Right.
that the idea is how can we feel like we have some control over those by
Right.
acting? How can we
Right.
put those 4 S's in place? And teaching kids from a very young age that they can handle challenges. And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing so much in terms of anxiety and depression is we've micromanaged. We've done a lot of doing things for kids. They
Yeah.
need the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so with that simple process, so let's just be very general. Most parents, definitely our clients and the students that we teach, if I can just talk about that group or that network, they're double income families. How we grew up with grandma looking after 7, 10 kids, that kind of is all behind us predominantly, right? So double income families, kids go to school, they come home, they've got tutor, they've got piano, they've got so many things, they're just so busy. And I think that's kind of like the default for parents these days, because the busy kids, they don't get into trouble. And that brings up that point that you said before. If they're not going to fail, and if they're not going to make errors, if they're not going to try and explore, then what kind of children are we actually raising? They've got very, very little coping skills, right? So they don't have the resilience because they've not been put in positions of empowerment where they're trusted to do things and fail at doing things. So I'm just thinking now, when you've shared that, is what are the actions, and do we educate the kids from an early age? I mean, obviously, 2, 3, or 4 is the best time to start, but it's never too late to to take on new habits. It's just a little bit more work involved, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah. So between the age of, say, 7 to 12, if they've developed some bad habits, or mums and dads haven't created this mindset of empowering the kids, and they've kind of coddled them too much and done too much for them, it's not the end of the road for them. It's not, wash your hands and it's done. What can they do to kind of, the word inculcate, or what can they do to teach the kids now, just a little shift here and there? Because as we know, little shifts can make a massive difference if it's compounded. So what are the little shifts that parents could do now to help their kids learn to be more resilient?
I think one of the things is, by having the knowledge, by recognizing and seeing, oh, wow, self-esteem isn't that neurochemical response is really important. So I need to stop myself from stepping in. But not just stop myself from stepping in, because I actually can step in. But instead of doing this for my child, I'm going to question them. I'm going to give them the 4 S's and scaffold for them how they can handle that problem. So
Right.
it's not that they have to stop engaging. It's that they need to change. Instead of doing things for kids, we can scaffold it so that they can, we always want to think about independence. We always want to think about the future. How can I get my kids to be living on their own? And what are the steps that I need to get there?
Yeah. We say the big buzz now is 21st century life skills, or future-proof your child. And, it's gone down that path. But reality is we just want them to be able to take care of themselves so they can cook and clean and be a polite person in society, and, make friends and influence people in a positive way, not in a manipulative way. We want them to have all of those skills. So what are those 4 S's that you talked about?
Self. Who am I? What do I stand for?
Dragonfly, right?
All in the dragonfly. So self is all the things that I think about myself. So as we're talking to our kids and giving them the sense of self, of they're worthwhile, they have all these skills, they can do this, they have the ability. And one of the things that I love is recognizing things that can be weaknesses as well. I think we're so afraid to say to kids that, boy, you really have trouble with that. But it's part of it is understanding what they've chosen to spend their time doing.
Right.
So one of the examples of this is, I have a son who spends a lot of time, he was a debater, he's really academically driven, he's got a lot of strengths. Artistic skills, maybe not so much one of his greatest strengths. And he was doing a presentation once, and he had a poster that he had to make, and he made the poster. And he didn't have to, it wasn't like an assignment that he had to do on his own. He could have had somebody help. It was an extracurricular thing. It was kind of a science fair kind of, but it wasn't academic. It was a maker's fair that he chose to present a project that they had done. And they created this poster. Now, his sister is an incredible artist.
Right.
And so he could have easily, for giving her a turn in the front seat of the car, he could have to create this beautiful poster. And so when I went to it and I looked at it and I said, I got to tell you, art is not something that you have spent a lot of time on. And we're afraid to give our kids that feedback. We're afraid to say, you know what, this probably isn't one of your strengths. Maybe it would have been had you spent some time, but it didn't. And so I said, maybe this is a time to use one of your supports. And actually he's a big climate change activist, and was, every time after that he was doing some marching and climate protests, he always went to his sister and he'd be like, can you do a pose for me? So, he learned
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
okay, that you don't have to be good at everything. Now, obviously, if it was a school assignment, he couldn't say, hey, I'll pay you to do my school assignment. But
Right.
things that you do have choices, recognizing that you don't have to do everything alone and recognizing the skills that you
And to practice that, right? To practice
have.
that. So for the parent to encourage it and to guide it, to coach it, right? Without
Yes.
stepping in. I like what you said about scaffolding. So it's kind of like standing around, and it's not life or death situation. This is something like, a child dropping an egg out of a fridge, and dad hitting the roof and screaming at the kid. Is kind of like, that's an experiment. They just learned something. So scaffolding, I really like that term, and the way that we speak to the child about it.
Well, scaffolding is actually an education term that it came from the idea of constructing a building. You create
Yeah,
scaffold around and then you gradually take them away.
yeah,
And so when I'm talking to parents, I'm always saying, always think about what you want them to do in the future. And then think about what are the steps to get there. We can scaffold just about anything. And I like to give the
yeah,
example of kids riding a bike,
yeah,
that because that's an example we know. We don't just hand them a
yeah,
bike, say, go ahead, go for it. Like, people know that they've got to hold on. First, maybe you have training wheels, then you hold on to them and then you gradually let go, but you
yeah,
don't do it right away. So
right.
we can do that with almost anything. Cooking a meal, setting the table, anything, any skill, we can give them supports and then gradually remove those supports.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just looking over to your dragonfly, and self supports, and the next will be situation. I should have just asked you. See, I should reach out to my support.
Yeah, I know these. Situation is, how do we look at that challenge and put it in perspective? And then
Mhm.
are we able to break it down into the doable parts?
Yeah,
And so parents can really help their kids with this when sometimes, kids overreact, right? They're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And you can say, let's put this, it's okay. It's not that big a deal. It's something that we can work through. Let's sit down and break it down into the first step and then the second step, and helping them break that down into the doable steps so that you're not looking at, you know, I think about it. The first example that came to mind is a marathon. You don't go out and just try and do a marathon. You say, okay,
right.
this is a big challenge, but I'm going to break it down and I'm going to figure out a schedule and I'm going to do this first and then this um, and then break it down, because those big challenges need to be done in small parts.
Yeah, perfect. And then the fourth part of the 4S system
Mhm. Is
of the
strategy.
dragonfly, strategy.
And strategies are, what are the things that you actually do to handle that challenge? Do you have one strategy? Are you able to recognize when that strategy isn't working? And are you able to change to a different strategy? So parents can help their children and say, is your strategy working right now? So they can watch and let kids struggle for a little while. But then they might want to ask and say, hey, is your strategy working? Do you have another strategy? Um, and it's interesting because we should have multiple strategies, but the one that people are often reluctant to use is the strategy of giving up, of saying, that can be a good strategy sometimes. And I'll use an example from my son for another example. I'll pick on him today. He had, during the summer, he really wanted to hike the Long Trail, which is a very, very long trail. It's the whole state of Vermont. And he was
Yes.
like, I'm going to hike it. I'm going to hike it alone. This is, perfect time, whatever. And I said, it's going to be a really hard thing. And I said, plan ahead, do this. And I said, I want you to consider this your first attempt at doing it, because
Yeah.
recognize it may not happen. And he was like, no, I'm going to do it. And in the first day, he called and he said, I was not prepared. and he said, this is not the time. I'm not going to make it. So I need to cut my losses now. He spent the first night, had a lot of blisters, but he recognized that it was time. He actually did that twice this summer. Once was for that one. The other one was for a different hike he was doing, and they didn't recognize that there was a drought. And so they hiked 22 miles and found zero water. So they called me and they said, we can't do this. So recognizing when to cut your losses, when to say, you know what, this is not the time. And that's okay. It's a learning experience. You shouldn't look at that as a failure. You should look at it as a learning experience. And that's what I kept saying to him. And he was so worried about coming home because he was like, I didn't do it. And I was like, you learned a lot. You learned for your next try. And maybe the next time you'll do it. I don't know.
Man, Donna, I love how you framed that for him, that he was going out to do something. He was empowered enough to make that decision. He thought about it. I read a book about that journey, and it was like, I got like a couple of chapters in. It's a mammoth undertaking.
It is.
But we've got a fully developed brain, well, hopefully by the age of 30 plus, and we can put that in perspective. But for him to actually think that he could do it, that was already a win. Mm-hmm. But he just had to go through the process of understanding that that's his first attempt, or it's a try, and that he had that out. He had an exit without feeling so demoralized or upset with himself or down. And I think a lot of kids miss that. Donna, I don't know if you see it, but I see it a lot because they're so scared of failure that they don't take action.
Yeah.
I see it a lot.
When you were talking about the overscheduling, one of the things is we need to fire the pathways in our brain. We need to fire the neurons in our brain to create pathways. That's the way brains develop. And the time that our prefrontal cortex pathways develop is in that unstructured playtime. It's in the time that nobody is guiding you and you have to make decisions on your own. And so often one of the things that is happening is that parents are being their children's prefrontal cortex.
Right.
That does not allow kids to fire those neurons, so they're not creating those pathways for their executive functions, which is the highest level thinking that we have. So they need practice to fire those neurons. They need to be able to make those mistakes and feel like it's okay. And one of the other things, and I just, it's so difficult to watch, is the that we can surveil our kids so much at this time. We can, have this, technology has allowed us to see everything they're doing. And my youngest, when he was in elementary school, they implemented a new program that was almost like a social media for the classroom, where the teacher was taking pictures of the kids all day and posting them to a website that the parents were supposed to go on and comment on throughout the day.
This is very common in Asia right now.
So I went and I said to the administration, why are you doing this? And they said, well, for one thing, the parents really want to see what their kids are doing throughout the day. And I said, and that is not developmentally appropriate. If we are doing that, we're giving them the message that we don't trust their teachers and that our parents need to watch them all the time. And if their parents aren't watching, they're not safe. And when we're doing that, what we are doing is directly leading to the dropout and suicide rate of colleges.
Because they can't cope. They don't have the coping mechanisms. They haven't practiced it. They haven't built those neural pathways, those cow tracks in their mind. They're not developed.
So I really feel like we need people to know that.
Man, Donna, that is such an important point. And when we teach the kids and we get feedback, when we screen parents who are watching this, generally you will be one of our clients or going to be our clients, but we always screen and we see how the parents react with the children. There's no secret to this. And we want to know that they're coming into an environment that's going to be conducive to their parenting and for us as a group. And so what we say is that the free time, the free play time, we sometimes, very rarely, will get a comment like, all they did today was play. Right? And I go like, oh, here we go. Maybe this, with all due respect to the parent, maybe they don't know our philosophy. Maybe we haven't done our homework to give them the tools to understand what it is that we're doing and what our philosophy is and what our program is based on and our outcomes. We haven't done our job properly to screen them and to educate them on what we do, because if they did, they will be totally hands off. They'll grab their coffee and they'll come and cheer for them. And they'll walk off and they go do their shopping or whatever. Then they'll come back and they'll cheer again. They might see them in a water break time, but generally it's hands off. And we always say, let the coach, let the teacher teach, right? But I'm really, really interested to hear. I was really interested to hear your perspective on that, about that one in the classroom, because parents, it's out there and it's becoming a bit of a trend in Asia. And there's 2 apps that I've got here in New Zealand, and they're posting things on which are updates. And I'm like, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable with how much already. And this is not photos of them in the class, but there's just a lot of communication. And it's kind of like, let the teacher do their job and we'll do ours.
Yeah, it's interesting because do you know what Life 360 is?
Like, yes.
So I have promised my kids I wouldn't do Life 360.
Right.
So I don't have that and
intrusive.
Won't, but I understand why some people get it. I do.
Yeah.
And there's that temptation to feel like we need to watch them.
Yes.
But I've also had, I remember having a conversation with somebody who said, well, I have it, but I only use it in emergencies. And I said, I understand that. That's fine. I'm not judging. If you have it, you have it. I don't, and that's okay.
That's okay.
And she said, well, like the other day, I knew that my son had an 8 o'clock class, and I looked and he was still in his dorm room. So I needed to call to get him up to make sure that he made it to his 8 o'clock class. That's not an emergency. When your college student is missing their 8 o'clock class, it's not an emergency. No. In fact, it's pretty appropriate sometimes. I miss 8 o'clock classes.
Yes.
And and I always say that it's a slippery slope paved with good intentions. Because people don't, it's so easy to justify, well, I just want to help them with this. Oh, I just want to help them with that. And I understand it because we're in grasshopper mode. We're in that protective mode.
Yes.
But, I love to tell parents stories about, I had a friend who was advertising for a job, and he said over 100 of the resumes that came to him, the cover letter was written by the parent.
Oh, wow.
But that was only the 100 that actually signed their own name. They didn't even pretend to be the child, the adult applying for the job. It was the parent saying, my son would like to apply to this position. I've attached his resume, I think he would be great. Like, would you, clearly, where did those applications go? Right in the garbage. Because, and there are stories literally of parents showing up with their kids for job interviews and calling bosses and asking why their child didn't get the raise or didn't get the, whatever it was, the new position.
We're not judging. It's just like if some of these things are in your DNA, I mean, it's conditioned. You've learned these things over time, and it's become a habit. These things can be changed, but if you want to change them, nobody's going to judge you. But to the detriment of your child, if you're open enough and you're practicing any form of conscious parenting or being intentional with your parenting, you're going to study a little bit as a parent. You're going to spend a little bit of time to improve yourself, because listen, things have changed. We're not in the industrial age anymore. You know, it's like, man, my father used to chase me around the house with a horsewhip, and that worked. And I loved my dad. I love him. That worked. I was naughty, and well, in those days I was naughty. I was exploring things, and I got into things that he didn't think I should. And, I copped it, and I was disobedient sometimes. I got it, but we've evolved. Donna, right? We've evolved, people. So we spend a little bit of time.
And I think it's just, I think when people realize that this is a natural response of the brain to want to protect your kids.
Yes.
But I think, and that's why I say it's a slippery slope paved with good intentions. It's little decisions when they're 5 that lead to that justification. So we need to start when we're 5 saying, you know what, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to, and it's hard because everybody around us is doing it. And I think, there are so many lessons, and one of the problems we're seeing now, on our side of the world especially, is that feeling like your child deserves to go see their friends and go hang out at a party when we're in a pandemic. The lesson needs to be, we can't do that.
Well, that's a very powerful lesson. I mean, I was in Singapore at the time, and we went through it, and it was kind of like, we're trying to overcompensate for our children and justify and say this and say that, but actually, as they say, shit happens. This is life, and we've got to embrace ourselves. That these things, I found myself, I was like stopping myself. Don't justify it. Don't make don't go into this whole rhetoric and this whole narrative about it. It is what it is. If the policeman, I say this to my kids, if the policeman asks you to get out of the car, what do? You get out of the car generally, because he's an authority, and you respect authority in that sense because it's empowered in him and entrusted in him that he'll be able to guide you to safety or something. If your father asks you to do something and it's reasonable, you work with this. So if the government tells us that we need to stay in for our own good will and good health, there is a lot of us that resisted. We're actively outdoors all the time, but we found ways, Donna, you'll probably relate to this. We found ways to make sure that we got our outdoor time. For example, wearing a mask or riding a bicycle. As long as you're on a bicycle in Singapore at the time, you're fine. As long as you're jogging, you're fine. So we still managed to get out. We're being creative, but we weren't breaking the law. So, that isolation thing, it created so many opportunities for children and for parents to think outside the box.
Right.
We're learning something this way for so long, and this is how it's going to be, but now it's not. Oh, okay. How do we cope, adapt, adopt? What do we do? Amazing.
And we need to mitigate risk. We need to, we're talking mental health. People need to have opportunities to get outside, to do stuff. But we need to also keep in mind working with, I have 4 teenagers, and the risk to teens themselves isn't necessarily that bad. But our mantra is very much, it's not individual risk, it's collective responsibility. And interestingly, I was talking to one of them about it, and she and my parenting has always, my philosophy, I always try to stick with privileges come responsibilities, with responsibilities come privileges.
Privileges, yes.
And I said, but this is a different time. You can't earn the right to go to a party during a pandemic. And one of my kids said, yeah, I get it. Just because I earned A's doesn't mean I have the right to kill grandma.
Higher cognitive level here. We're challenged, right?
So it's a challenge. It's definitely.
Yeah. With 4, really appreciate you're running out of time. The 4 of your children are all in adolescent, different ages. From how old to how old now?
13, 15, 17, 18.
Wow. Parents who are with us now, they're generally from 6 to 12, predominantly 7 to 12, and they usually stay with us for like 2 to 5 years. So parents, embrace yourself. It's coming, and we'll have to check in with Donna again and get some updates on that. But if in parting, if you could give us a quick summary, Donna, what is something that parents can do today and start as a small, how do you eat an elephant? My son said to me, "You don't eat an elephant, Dad." So how do you eat an elephant? Small bits. You do the scaffolding and you break it away as you go. What can parents do today? One little thing, and then start building out from that scaffolding. What would you recommend? 7 to 12-year-old kids.
I would recommend just recognizing, just even just having an understanding of when you're stepping in too early and stepping back and trying to let them struggle a little bit. Just taking that extra little bit, and instead of doing something for them, ask them what they're doing and ask them to explain, "Hey, what are you doing? It's hard."
Yeah.
But that sort of override, just practicing that override for a little bit.
I think that's a very, very easy step that we can all take, Donna, and practice it, and then from there we build. And I highly recommend the simple courses. You've got some free courses on your website as well. There were some really good resources on there. Pathways to Empower. And I'll put the links in the show notes, of course, and I'll put links on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. We're all over the place, right? This is the digital age. And, some people are on Instagram. Some people aren't. We've got to meet them where the people are at. Everybody's got their favorite. So Resilient Mindset Model, we went through that today. The courses and memberships are there. I've signed up on the basic level, and I'm going to buy some more because I really appreciate your structure. And we always need to upskill ourselves. So parents, do something very, very small today with your children. When they're about to do something, smash an egg or run out of the house without their shoes on, or sleep in and be late for school. Is it life or death? Is it an emergency? Probably not. And if it's not, take a deep breath, walk past, have yourself a cup of tea, and come back and see how they're doing.
Great. I wanted to add one more thing, is that we just launched memberships. So we have memberships both for families. So because some people have, an adolescent, an elementary, more than one, the parenting courses. And then we'll be doing part of the memberships. And then we also have memberships for parent organizations. So we have different things for different levels. But the other part of that is that with the memberships, we'll be doing 4 book clubs a year, and they will be members only, except for the first one, which is going to be launching in December. We're going to be doing a book talk with best-selling author Jane McGonigal she wrote Super Better. And if you are worried about screen time and you want to learn how to think about screen time differently, she talks a lot about the neuroscience of why gaming can be so powerful in terms of building resilience. And I felt a lot better about games after I read the book and started playing with my kids a lot more. And it's been great.
Oh, thank you for leaving us on that note. That is so awesome. And parents, if you'd like to find Donna, as I said, the messages will be there in Pathways to Empower. And I highly recommend going on and getting a couple of those courses and look at the model. I went over the model several times before I even met with you today, Donna. And I really, really appreciate it. And I'm just chipping away little bits at a time. So thanks for your time, Donna, and stay on the line. I'm just going to finish up with a quick video. Thanks, parents. And we will see you soon. This is Coach Hanson signing out from Parenting Matters. Bye.